we still need classrooms. So delighted that there's a mix of people individually and also collectively joining in. In particular, delighted to work with Nala to explore some of the challenges in educational contexts to fake news. I see, somebody's joined up on their cam there. I also, just as a quick one, Fergus, I noticed a few people asked to be presenters in the comments there. I'm not sure if that means that that has to be actioned, but I just noticed a few there in the messages. So in terms of starting off with today, so we're going to run for roughly 20 minutes, and then after 20 minutes of various things in the presentation, I'll take you through. We'll basically have a question and answer session. So anybody who has any questions or anything they'd like to fire out, you'd be welcome to. I mean, very often I can respond to it as I'm going along too, that's no problem. But obviously, if there's a few things, stick them at the end. That'd be great. So in terms of the plan, I mean, this is, you may have seen from the outline that there's quite a few things I wanted to cover. Whether we'll get through it or not, fingers crossed. But you'll be able to see that there's a few different elements there that are in the plan for the webinar, and we can work our way through it. So in terms of starting out, as a human rights education and development education NGO, we were definitely taken by the rise of what is now known as fake news, which is nothing new. But the need to deal with it educationally was of a major urgency to us. So as you can see there on that slide, just not another toolkit. We kind of the dread of going, oh, not another one coming out. But we felt for a number of reasons that the toolkits regarding global development issues and global citizenship issues weren't necessarily speaking to each other. So an approach that we developed, I should say that this webinar is kind of built around, is a toolkit that we developed called Beyond the Click. And this is the idea of it is about actions and not just clicks online, but what happens in the real world as opposed to the digital one alone. So that was about getting beyond the click. And ultimately, it's a critical literacy project. But in terms of the not another toolkit point, we felt that a lot of digital citizenship toolkits focused very much on individuals alone. So very often it was about, how do I handle myself on Twitter? What are you going to do about that tweet that you're going to put out, whether it's about you as an individual or if you're representing a small group or just a group in general. But too often toolkits didn't always try to work towards digital communities, at least digital citizenship, in the sense that asking what do we want to do or what do we want to say about issues and how do we manage digital happenings, whether it's about our actions or dealing with things like fake news. So in that context, we thought this is an interesting one because it isn't just about individuals and the weight that's placed on your shoulders and your tweet, but it's asking about how do we deal with, it's a communities of practice idea, and figuring some of that out and offering suggestions and supports and reference points in navigating those kinds of approaches. So in terms of just, as you might see from this slide in particular, that things have changed quite a bit since the internet was first released onto us in the world, and technology has changed quite a bit, and the way that we approach it and the way that it is taught, as you can see from the cover of that book on the internet, is we don't tend to see surfers as much anymore on the how to engage with the internet, but there's a different version of that, I'm sure, a different version of that cover updated. Obviously photoshopped. I'd be happy to see it if anyone has any options of it. But just to give you a sense of where my familiarity with the internet comes from, this era and after. In terms of getting straight into fake news as an idea, you'll see from this slide that we're surrounded by news all the time that has certain messages. So whether it's about the news or whether it's in the front covers of newspapers, as you can see from this example, lots of memes and tweets and social media posts get generated out of this kind of material, but also feed into it as well. The reason why I wanted to start with this slide up front was because if we're going to look at critical literacy or thinking about the media, thinking about the news, it's very important that it doesn't just happen in the abstract when we do seek to learn about things like a news item that may or may not be real, or elements of it that are true, or elements of it that might be blurry in terms of where the truth lies. It may not be clear. That the reality is that the amount of materials that are put out every day that feed into an agenda that might be misleading or not is something that I think we know. We can't exactly say these days that oh, I didn't know. I mean, we're surrounded by it. So being able to start with some newspaper headlines, and I'm not picking on the Daily Express in particular with these headlines. This was based on a piece of research, as you see from the note at the bottom there, from Liz Jarrett, who's done some fantastic research on the communication of migration issues and how it may or may not fan the flames of hatred. So as a piece of research, it's quite interesting, and ended up getting reported widely. But you can see that certainly from our perspective in doing critical literacy work, we would suggest that we don't shy away from the things that you would pass every day on the way into the classroom. It's all the things that are outside of the room that part of our job is to bring them in and grapple with today's news. Being able to talk about Christchurch, for example, and what gave rise to Christchurch, and some of the information about it with the mosque and the shooting of people in Christchurch in New Zealand, and the kinds of ideas that that enabled that to happen are difficult, but they're also something that I don't think we should avoid. Certainly, it's being talked about quite a bit. By students, directly, indirectly, it's in their heads. The challenge is to open out that space for critical engagement and discussion, and I've no doubt lots of educators will be doing that. Every time the class is on, but being able to do it in a very direct way, or at least thinking about it in this kind of way, is something that I would hope, as an approach, would build in a regular engagement of doing this kind of dealing with the big issues, the big global issues that are in the developed and the developing world as they're happening. And being able to dedicate some space towards doing that is quite important, I would think. And certainly there's lots of things out there to enable you to do that, and I'm just going to share some of those with you. I'm conscious I have about 10 minutes of more of conversational, taking you through elements of the toolkit and other parts that I set out to do as part of this webinar. So going straight into it, this is another example of, as you can see from the Twitter account of Israel in Ireland, the embassy managed account, that these were memes that were put out by the official account around the war in Gaza a few years ago. And these memes were put out and they were withdrawn subsequently. However, the reaction to them was quite strong, both in Ireland and outside of Ireland and across Europe. There's a number of them that are there like that. The question is, what do we do with things like this educationally? Do we ignore them? Is it too difficult? How do we unpack them if we are going to? Should we? These are questions that we would throw out all the time, but knowing full well that the learning and engagement that goes on outside of the classroom is very much in this terrain of these kinds of things that end up getting circulated. It doesn't have to be, I'm not picking on these ones in particular right now, but I'm doing it just to illustrate the point that there's other versions of things like this that enable very emotive reactions, and being able to take them from online, take a screenshot or take examples of it, and put it into your back pocket in terms of going, okay, maybe we should look at this, whether it is a tweet or whether it is an image or something like this, and allow you to unpack it, saying, there's, as you would know, reading critically would mean looking at the image, looking at the text, looking at what the symbols are, looking at how it's visualized, and so on, and being able to have discussions about what does that mean, how do we feel about such things. And feelings are actually quite important for a number of reasons. Certainly, I mean, anybody would have a sense of that at election times, that, is the data sufficient to get a reaction or to get a positive swing towards one party or one politician in particular, or an idea, or does it have a lot more to do with your instinct that as fully developed, or at least consolidated based on all the information and how you end up feeling about it? So I think being able to talk about feelings is important as well. But anyway, these are examples of an invitation really to reach out to things that are going on in social media challenges every day and sample it for the purposes of exemplar critical engagement. The reason why I'm saying reach out is because the internet is moving fast. There's a lot of things going on. Keeping on top of all of it is impossible. I mean, just looking at this slide, you can see that stuff happens fast and there's a lot of it. Even looking at the number of hours of YouTube material that are uploaded is just, I don't know, it's phenomenal. So, will we ever be able to stay on top of everything? No, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to be selective about how you go about doing that. And some of the reference points I'll give you over the course of the next 6 minutes should be helpful in that. So we know that the consumption of these kinds of materials is on the increase, not on the decrease. It's not even plateauing, but the volume of consumption of things like video as a trend in learning is remarkable, and also quite frightening in terms of how we might ask the question, are we prepared, or are we preparing students enough to grapple with these things critically, as opposed to just it just streaming through and we're going to operate over here on sticking to our curriculum and so on. I'm putting some of this information up just to make the point quite clearly that we can't escape this reality in terms of learning and how learning happens. So the challenge for us is to work our way in to deal with that in the context of our own specific learning and teaching environments. So this is why I wanted to put it up, that it's something that we have to get a handle on. In terms of the where the wealth is and how information is produced, the inequalities in the world are quite important. And as a broad topic from where we're concerned in 80/20 as an organization, is about the relationship between the developing and the developed world, developing countries and so on. And for all kinds of reasons, that global inequalities have an impact in terms of livelihoods, capabilities, access to things like the internet. But even further from that is about, in particular, when you talk about something like fake news, you can ask the question, where is information produced? Who produces things that we end up consuming as readers, as consumers of news and social media? It doesn't have to be, they're not exclusive, but in terms of the production of knowledge, where does it come from? Who can afford to produce is another way of looking at it. So this image here is from a book that I've been involved in producing and editing, and we're putting up this information here to state very clearly that where information comes from and who produces it has to be key questions that we always come back to. Martin Turner, cartoonist in the Irish Times, as a lot of people might know, is damn good at his job, and here's a very good illustration that asks questions about, is digital everything? Is it all online compared to, the majority in the world, majority populations compared with the minority, which would be us, and how digital is seen as a silver bullet in many ways to lots of hurdles to do with increasing access to education and so on, and provision, whether it is everybody gets tablets or otherwise. But we do have ideas. This cartoon is a reminder of the global trend. In terms of that question, normally at this point in a workshop, I'd say, does anyone want to take a guess at Wikipedia in particular as as a source of knowledge that a lot of people have access to, and has become a mainstream reference point for all kinds of general knowledge issues. Asking the question, where does information come from that ends up on Wikipedia? Looking at this graphic, you would go, well, okay, I had no idea that, for instance, that more information is produced and ends up being uploaded onto Wikipedia from the Netherlands than the entire continent of Africa. So when it comes to asking questions like, who wrote that piece all about the history and population and background information on South Africa, you'd look at information like this and you'd have serious questions to ask. So I mean, I'm putting the slide up just to give you an important stopping point to just slow down, take a look, take a deep breath, and know that, you know, asking where knowledge is, where things come from, and who can afford to produce it, and have people involved, been involved in expressing their own voice on issues and producing knowledge around that is an important question to ask of everything that comes across your desk and across your room. And this shows you, from just looking at what seems like the global commons of a knowledge platform, that the reality is quite the opposite in terms of the sense of equality that everybody has access to it. This graph tells you otherwise. In terms of a few tools that we would recommend that you can use at speed, one of them would be, we have it's called as you can see from that slide there, it's the 10 elements for global digital citizenship. And it has a range of small paragraphs that are about elements that you can use to critically engage with things in front of you, whether they be the digital media, whether they be videos, images, a piece of text. And it's broken up into 3 strands. There's ways of thinking. There's also ways of working. So how might we engage with those things? So as a group, being able to work through it. And the 3rd strand would be on ways of acting, so doing something about it. Being able to do applied digital citizenship is something that we're very interested in, and that means that it is about things in the real world as well. As you can see at the number 11 there is a final one that we snuck in, all about the idea of the commons. Are some things tradable and some things not tradable? You know, what about fresh air? You know, and carbon credits. Being able to talk about things like that is quite important. So these are reference points and tools to help you unpack a piece of a piece of material that's in front of you, digital or otherwise, or a tweet and so on. In terms of a few extra tools, we know that this one is well worth looking at. It's called the Perspectives tool. All this information will be made available after the webinar as well. Fergus said he would share it with you. And this is from NYCI's One World Week resource. And the Perspectives tool is something that you can use. It's a ready-made tool for using in learning contexts with, for example, headlines of the day. And as you can see, this is great for group work or as a class, or you could even just have it up, printed out and have it up, blown up. But it allows you to take different perspectives. We don't have time. I might show you a video in a second that I have, because I don't want to run over. But there's a useful video that I think might help in terms of perspectives and thinking about ways of unpacking material that's in front of you.
Tom, if I could interrupt you there, you can take the extra 10 minutes and we can skip the questions and answer session. People can email me questions. What do you think?
I'll tell you what, I'll run at 5, and I'd still like to offer the chance, because I know people may have stuff to throw in. But if that's okay with you, Fergus, and everyone else.
Yeah, whatever you think.
Quite happy to take questions now, or after, absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of speeding through, I'll give you a few other reference points. There's the 9 at 9 is done by the journal.ie. Every morning there's 9 key headlines. As you can see from here, these are the 9 headlines of this morning. Being able to give yourself a space to look at things like the news of the day and use something like the Perspectives tool to assess or to think about what's there is a useful practice to kind of build into your environment, so that people and students become familiar with thinking critically about what's going on. I'm not saying they're not, but these are useful tools to develop that as part of the culture of learning that goes on as a critical literacy, a critical media literacy approach. There's other reference points that are worth pointing to as well. There's the health-related NHS website /news, have a very good I guess it's a fact checker that they have regarding health issues, and it's called Behind the Headlines. And what they do is they take things that might be talked about in the week regarding any newspapers in the UK, diabetes or cancer or health trends, and there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of bogus stuff that goes around, and they're very good at breaking it down in a very, very easy way and in a systematic way every time. It's done as a blog post, so it's very helpful. In terms of engaging with external posters and billboards and the ideas that it's loaded with, this is an example of a McDonald's one in a tube station in London, in Kennington. And here's a different one in terms of NGOs. This is Save the Children and the Lottery of Life campaign. As you can see, what life is like in two different places, but the images look very familiar. And as you can see, that's it was a public campaign that was on billboards around Norway, I think, in that instance, but the same ones were printed in the UK. You've been able to break down images. These are some of the obviously NGO campaign ones, and they're loaded with different kinds of messages. But being able to do it on any of them, and difficult ones, is quite important. So a reference point certainly to look at is the Code of Conduct on Images and Messages, which is produced by DOCUS, which is the umbrella organisation for development NGOs in Ireland. The DOCUS Code of Conduct asks NGOs that conduct their affairs, do their marketing and promotion work, to think about the voice of the person that's in there, in the image or the video, that they have their permission, that they're named, that they don't hang on to an image for 20 years and use it any which way they want to. So this is about best practice around the use of images and how you might conduct yourself in terms of marketing and a marketing department. So I think this is a useful one as well, because this helps you to read images in a particular way. As you can see, values are important as well, to be able to pick them out and talk about the meaning that is being communicated. What are they being? What are the symbols going on in there? In terms of other, we're down to the wire in terms of anything else I could show you. But the toolkit that I talked about, Beyond the Click, has, as you can see, just a bunch of things there that are materials ready for in learning contexts. A bunch of activities, 25, 3 per learning strand, as we didn't want to overload anyone with too much of any. You could easily do 100 activities. I'm being quite honest. It took us a year to write this, but that's very good. It took us a year to write this, and that included doing it in such a way that it is meaningfully adaptable. So rather than just here's 100 straight activities, there's 3 per learning strand, and you can go at it any which way you would like to. There's also, in particular with this toolkit, there's 20 different case studies of how people have done critical digital global citizenship in practice. So this is a reference point for example, there's campaigns in the UK, there's campaigns in Australia about migrants and migration, and all about, as you can see from this image, an immigration poster to do with small boats and the returning of boats at sea, turning them around. So we have examples of case studies of confronting some of the noise around that, and examples of how successful they were in terms of building popular responses to them. But anyway, there's examples there, and as you can see from here, from the URL, there's the toolkit. The web address is toolkit.8020.ie. As kind of a parting point, as part of our work, we work with a consortium of NGOs in Ireland on a website called developmenteducation.ie, and we're developing a fact-checking unit in conjunction with a number of NGOs in Ireland and in discussion with others like the Journal about responding to issues that need checking, that are not just about what Donald Trump might say, and a lot of the fact-checking work gets focused there. So we're interested in lots of other issues, and not only a short or a limited set of politicians and what they have to say. We're actually interested in lots of other entities and structures, like a company, for instance, and its climate change credibilities, or tackling climate change or not, and greenwashing and so on, or about what the World Bank says on ending poverty, for example. So we'll be doing that too. So we're down to a few minutes left. There's 3 minutes. If there's any questions, please feel free to fire them in. Fergus, I left some space there for questions. As you can tell, this could go on for some time, and I'd prefer it not to. So this is just a teaser, really, in terms of sampling ways of dealing with fake news as it's. Sorry, hello. Yep.
Sorry.
So if
yeah,
I may sorry, I may have been muted there. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, type them away, or you know, whatever suits. Yeah.
Tony, can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes, I can indeed, Fergus.
Yeah. At the moment, I don't see any questions coming up. So because we've come pretty much to 20 to 1, maybe we just call it a day and let the people get back to lunch or get back to work. Is that okay?
Yep, that's absolutely fine. If I was to give everybody a suggestion,